There was a lot of talk during the pandemic and lockdown that conferences would go. They've come back, and there's a reason for that, which is to do with trust and to do with the quality of information transfer you get face-to-face.
Any major takeaways from that event?
Lots of possibilities on the horizon, as well still as the fear and the uncertainty. But at least there's some sense of knowing where we can go.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Business AI Playbook. My name is Dominik, I'm the CEO and founder of Colossian. We focus on real-world examples, and today I have in our studio Donald Taylor, who is chair of the Learning Technologies Conference, have been running the Learning Sentiment Survey for over a decade, and has had multiple engagements over 30 countries as an international speaker, and is really excited about the topic we will discuss today. He's been consulting various organizations and experts worldwide. All right, so Don, thank you so much for coming today. It's so lovely to have you here as a guest, and you've been having like quite a busy week last week because you organized the Learning Technologies Conference in London 2025. Any major takeaways from that event?
It's very important to plan your recovery period. This time I took my Friday off. I had a couple of meetings. I've discovered that's the most important thing. But actually, seriously, whereas last year, 2024, it was a time of what I call AI shock. Everyone was talking about AI but didn't know what to do with it. This year, 2025, a whole different approach. Lots of very concrete things that we can do with AI, and lots of possibilities on the horizon, as well still as the fear and the uncertainty. But at least there's some sense of knowing where we can go.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a whole adoption cycle, and we see it real time happening, right?
Yeah.
But it's also quite promising that this conference is primarily after the pandemic. Your numbers are not dropping, but there is a steady increase, even possibly in terms of interest and vendors, possibly like ourselves, and also industry players are showcasing and sharing their knowledge more and more around these events.
Actually, we'll come back to this later on during our conversation, I'm sure, the importance of face-to-face conversation as part of knowledge transfer. But yes, there was a lot of talk during the pandemic and lockdown that conferences would go. They've come back, and there's a reason for that, which is to do with trust and to do with the quality of information transfer you get face-to-face.
Absolutely. It's an important psychological aspect. And the reason why we are here today as well is because I think it's one of my favorite topics personally, because I built Colossian, our company, with a mission to make knowledge transfer easy. Before this conversation, I mentioned to you that I believe we are doing so many things still unwell in terms of knowledge sharing within our own organization. And when we had the briefing for this episode, you mentioned that this is one of the most important challenges to solve, using traditional methods and also using AI. Can you elaborate on what you've seen over your career so far, why knowledge transfer, knowledge retention of a specific organization is so important? What trends are you seeing? What's emerging now in the field?
Yeah, I can't answer all of that in one short answer, but what we'll do is we'll explore these themes over the course of the conversation. But I think the key thing that I'd look at is how important and pressing the need for understanding what you know in your organization is now in comparison with how it was when I was a kid in the 1970s. When I was growing up in the 1970s, Ocean Tomo do this study of the value of the intangible assets of an organization. So they show that the Standard & Poor's 500 companies, their balance sheet was roughly 20% intangible and 80% tangible assets in the 1970s. That switched around, and it is now more like 15% tangible and the rest, 85%, intangible assets. What does that mean? It means that the value of companies is embedded in stuff that you can't pin down and sell. Some of that is know-how, some of it's algorithms and methods, a lot of it is people. Now, people are not like machinery. They can get up and walk. And if so much of the value of a company is embedded in the people, then you've got to make sure that you're looking after the people. You also have to make sure that when people walk out of the company, as they do for various reasons, they don't take with them the secret source of the organization. That knowledge, that know-how about what and how to do things doesn't disappear with them. And I think for me, that change is the crucial change, and there's a lot of other stuff as well, but that's the crucial change that's taken place in my lifetime.
And do you see an emergence of this challenge, like becoming harder because trends, for example, showcase that employee retention is going down, loyalty towards the employer is not the same as 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, loyalty comes in different packages. I mean, sometimes loyalty is just practical. In the old days, particularly in the UK, you had pension schemes, which meant if you stayed with an employer for a long period of time, it was worthwhile sticking around and then you left. That loyalty wasn't based on love. It was a very practical view of your future. But those pension schemes don't exist anymore. And it is also true that I think the phrase is work won't love you back. I think people have come to understand that it's a transactional relationship, or more of a transactional relationship than they believed in the past, between themselves and their employer. And so they don't have to stick around. There's less of an emotional reason to do that. And then if they leave, well, yeah, they can leave. So now, does it mean that people are staying in work for shorter periods of time? I'm not sure. I think the data on that is varied, but they certainly don't have to stick around in the way they used to have to, and they're probably more able to move, particularly if they're a high-value individual, more able to move to another job in a parallel or completely different sector because they've got transferable skills. One sector which we'll come back to look at as an example of that in the course of this conversation is the rail sector in the UK, which sounds a bit odd, but it's quite a good example of some of the issues that exist in keeping hold of skilled people and long-term effects of failing to do so. And in the rail sector, if you're a driver, you're unlikely to leave because there aren't many jobs for train drivers outside the train sector, obviously. But if you're a project manager, there are lots of jobs for project managers all over, and your skills are very transferable. And so there's definitely, it's not the case that everybody is staying in jobs for shorter periods of time, but some people are much more likely to transfer because they can get a better job elsewhere.
Yeah, I see the challenges there. And how do you see, how much of a focus area is this for relevant leaders, professionals? How much are they focusing on solving this challenge, or is this more like a sort of a not prioritized so far in the industry?
I don't think it is sufficiently realised, except in specific industries where it's absolutely seen as being crucial. So in rail is one. In the UK, in the rail industry, they are absolutely aware there is a generational cataclysm coming, which they've seen coming for probably about 10 years, but have been unable to do anything about. The same is true for oil and gas, which is different. Rail will continue as rail, it will change. Oil and gas is moving towards green energy. You still need people to handle legacy systems, and you need some of those engineers to transfer their skills to work with new technologies, from oil to electricity, but some of the fundamental things are the same. In those two industries in particular, it's seen as being a real issue. I don't think it's seen as being so much of an issue elsewhere, but it probably should be. And one of the reasons is demographic. You know that we have across Europe, a low birth rate. It's insufficient, typically 1.6, 1.5 birth rate, whereas to replace your population needs to be around 2.2, 2.3. And this means that we are not having enough people coming into work to maintain the levels of employment we've had in the past, which means that over time, we are certainly going to have under supply of qualified people, meaning that, again, if you're a highly qualified or highly valuable person, you're likely to move on elsewhere. I don't think enough people are taking enough notice of that. And I think for learning and development professionals, this represents an opportunity. If you're in the business of L&D, you can ask yourself, am I in the business of creating courses, or am I in the business of creating a strategic outlook for my company to assist it in the future? And if most organizations are going to suffer in the future by not being able to get hold of enough qualified people. They want to hold on to them and what they know. If L&D focuses there, it can be really strategic. But I don't think enough L&D people are thinking about that at all.
Yeah, I see that as well. Like that's why I asked about the sort of prioritization area of this. And my tricky question is to sort of get AI into this topic is, let's say tomorrow a CEO tells an HR or L&D leader that we are losing our knowledge. We are using basically this key information fast. Let's throw AI at the problem. Where would you start? Or is that even a valid statement? Like, is AI the best solution we have for this problem today?
I think it's unlikely a CEO would put it in terms of we're losing knowledge, but they would likely say we can't do what we used to be able to do. So they can see the performance impact. I think it is likely they'd say, let's throw some AI at it because AI is so hot. And I do think it is a legitimate thing. AI is both a cause and a savior in this situation. So AI enables the spread of information, makes it much more likely that highly qualified people can get work elsewhere. It also enables us to identify the tacit and implicit knowledge that we have in the organization and enables us to share it, codify it much more effectively. There are so many ways that can be done. I know that you've got some ideas yourself.
Yes, exactly. So I done some research, and one of the areas where we've been sort of heavily invested into is finding buried knowledge. So basically with enterprise-wide search systems called RAGs, now like basically trying to find insights and also correlation within the hidden information, the data lakes of a company.
How does that work? Can you tell me more about it? 'Cause this is the sort of thing that makes me super excited. What are you doing?
So basically, like you connect all the relevant knowledge bases and databases to an AI system that's, of course, like enterprise compliant with the right security measures, and you try to uncover insights. So basically, if you don't know about how to onboard to a specific software, or you don't know a specific steps for registering as a tool based on previous conversations, that there is hope in this whole thing, that hopefully the AI system recognizes that it's not outdated information, will showcase it to you and deliver it to you instead of you having to search for manuals. I think this is quite impactful for this topic that we are talking about. Have you seen this in practice, eventually, these enterprise-wide search systems based on unstructured data?
Yes, and there are a number of them out there, and I've been introduced to quite a few recently. I won't mention the names right now, but they tend to have the same approach, which is either they're looking across the data lakes, the repositories of formalized or semi-formalized information in terms of documents and what have you, or they're looking at conversations, typically in Slack channels and other areas where people are talking and email, and they're surfacing and codifying the knowledge in that way. But they all are aiming to do the same thing, which is to make it easier to find the information which is there, but which is spread very thinly across a variety of sources.
Absolutely. And from the perspective of our conversation, I see how AI could help with this. But for example, how about like hidden expertise where, for example, the expertise is indeed spread out, and based on what I saw, you have to use like certain knowledge graphs and mapping methodologies to rebuild that expertise that's like lost in a way. Have you seen practices doing that or successful implementation?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, at Learning Technologies, we had Jeppe Hansgaard speaking. Last year, we had Starling Hunter III speaking. Jeppe is from Denmark, and Starling is actually from the US, but he's based in Sweden. And it seems that the Nordic countries have a sort of an area of expertise thinking about this. I don't know why that is. And we also had, of course, keynoting this year, we had Daniel Hume speaking, talking about, he's the Chief AI Officer for WPP, and he was talking about his company, Satali, that he runs, and how they do organizational analysis across that, and also across the across WPP. And what they do is they find not what the organizational chart says people have relationships to each other, which is the formal structure, but the relationships that people actually have in terms of their electronic communications, and finding who are the nodes, who are the points that are most connected, who are the bridges between different groups, and so on. Once you have this information, it is possible much more rapidly to identify areas of expertise that aren't self-identified. Now, I think you have expert systems where people can identify themselves as an expert, and you can use that to go and find people, and that's very valuable. But you can also identify people without them knowing it, that they are an expert in something. And if they are isolated according to your organizational network analysis, you can find ways to invite them in to be better connected with the rest of the organization so that they can share their information, share their knowledge better. And I think it's important to bear in mind that not all knowledge can be codified easily. Sometimes knowledge is best transferred person to person or seen in context. I'll just give you a quick example of this. There was a series of experiments in the 1970s with lasers in the UK, and they were trying to get a transverse excited atmospheric pressure carbon dioxide laser to work. It's called a TEA laser. And they found that you could produce this laser in one lab, and you could write down everything it took to make this laser work, apparently, but you couldn't replicate it in another lab. Why not? A chap did some research into this, doing his PhD at the time, Harry Collins, and he looked across what was happening with this knowledge transfer. And he saw there was one particular thing that wasn't happening. You could do the transfer if you'd been based in the lab and you'd seen it, and then you went elsewhere, then you could do the transfer. So what was happening? What was happening was that the information wasn't being entirely codified. So you know that if you have a network diagram of electronics, you know these things. You've got lines, black lines going all over the place. You have a transistor, resistor, capacitor, whatever, right? On it, batteries, right? It's like a map of the underground in London. It shows where things are in relation to each other, but not the distances between them. The problem was that one particular component, a capacitor, had to be very close to the laser rather than far away. Now, it's a very heavy thing. Naturally, you'd put it far away on a bench and you'd have a wire leading from that to the laser, but there was a problem with having the wire being too long. That wasn't codified. And so if you didn't see it and you didn't take that implicit knowledge with you somewhere else, you could try to recreate it from the diagrams and you couldn't do it. And this is always seen as being a classic example of how very often you need to be with other people in order to see exactly how things are done in order to be able to do it properly. So coming back to your question, I think it's absolutely possible to bring people together online to do things, but I also think there's a lot to be said for having people share things in conversation face-to-face and see how the work is actually done, because that enables a lot that is implicit and not codified to be transferred.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, it's a really long answer, Dominik, but I think it's really important to be quite specific that we can't necessarily solve everything electronically. Sometimes you've got to get together and see how it happens.
Yeah. I love the practical and the physical examples there. But does this mean that when you sort of analyze and when you're involved in such enterprise implementations, are there many bottlenecks or further hurdles companies face, or what are even the typical issues that you observe when it comes to the implementation aspects that our audience could learn from?
Well, okay, so I mean, the key one is less to do with the face-to-face thing and more to do with people's reluctance to be involved in sharing the knowledge they have. And that can either be because they don't believe they have any and they just don't think they're important enough, or more likely they want to hold on to it, what's called knowledge hoarding. And that's true for individuals and it's true for managers. Managers very often don't want their teams to share what they've got outside it. And when I've seen this being dealt with effectively, it's because people high up in the organization make it very clear that this is part of your job and you will be ranked or you'll be performance assessed on how well your team is sharing information. Now, you need mechanisms for doing that. It could be a proxy. Is your team involved in this new setup we've got? Are they sharing enough? Can we see them doing mini blogs or whatever? There has to be some measure for it. And it has to be given priority by people high up in the organization. Otherwise, you will have knowledge hoarding, and then you won't get those information flows.
And are these, measurable numbers, like the number of like content pieces they create, and the number of sessions they attend, or the number of times they interact with such an AI system?
It could be something like that. And I think most importantly, it might be something like how often, because a lot of those can be gamed, and you have to think very carefully about those measures. So you have to think about something which is as close to being the behavior you want to have. And the behavior probably is that the people are responding to requests from outside their team for expertise. So you'd probably want somebody, you want the measure to be how often are you either responding directly or redirecting somebody's request towards a resource. So somebody in HR wants to know more about how something is done. You either respond to them directly or you point them towards a resource that will help. I think that is a better way of tracking it than saying, have you written some stuff today? Because we've seen that used quite often in the past, but unfortunately it tends to result in people simply writing nonsense or stuff that's very light. And that's not just, it doesn't have a neutral effect, it has a negative effect because you increase the bloat in the system. There's a lot of rubbish you have to get through to find what you need to find.
Yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting. I haven't thought about the psychological aspects there, but it truly makes sense.
It's always the people, Dominik. When you come down to the aspect, blocking and implementation, it's always the people.
I can imagine that. I talked to Katalina Schweninger, and she mentioned that normally the best teams to start with are actually engineers because of the nature of the job, that they have to like keep sharing knowledge and educate.
This is something which I've noticed at Ericsson, and I think they're doing a really good job with their skills implementation, precisely because they're very process focused and they're all interested in making the thing work. So yeah, I think Kathleen's got a good point there. Start with engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also had a point around preserving conversations. What I meant around is basically having AI accompany us to meetings, sessions, talks when it's primarily around sharing status, sharing knowledge, not typically one-on-ones, but like team meetings. Is that being widely implemented now? Like in our case, for example, we do have AI companions on external and some internal meetings as well. I saw it working well. I'm not sure how across the industry is well adopted in terms of saving all those notes around even internal conversations.
I think we can see from our own experience of attending meetings that it is very widely done in the sense that transcripts are created and summaries are created very widely. I don't know how much of a formal process there exists in most organizations for taking that content and turning it into stuff that's useful. So I think that there is probably a gap there. There's something else to bear in mind as well, though. At the moment, I think people are quite blasé about having their stuff recorded.
Yeah.
But I think increasingly in the future, people are going to be more aware of when a conversation has a microphone on it and when it doesn't. And very often I'm involved now in conversations where we explicitly say at the beginning, there's no recording, there's no automatic transcript here. Feel free to say what you want to say. Because I think people are concerned that if what they say is transcribed, that can be a hostage to fortune in the future. Who knows what somebody might come back and say about them in the future as a result.
Exactly. That might even reduce productivity or like decision making outcomes. But can that be countered via sort of psychological safety in any ways, via educational aspects of AI, or given the nature of the technology, this is more about like getting used to the situation?
It's really weird. And I don't know which way it will go. If you look at photographs, National Geographic magazine had a huge issue, I think it was the 1990s, where they had a picture of the pyramids on the front cover and they moved the pyramids slightly closer together so they could fit that familiar rectangle that exists on the front of the National Geographic magazines. And there was an uproar about this. How could they change a picture? Now, it might still be the case for the National Geographic, but if you look at people's photographs on LinkedIn, increasingly people are using either photographs that are slightly doctored or that are completely created by AI and nobody thinks it's odd. So we are inviting AI into our daily lives. It may be that we get completely used to it in the future and nobody thinks about it. On the other hand, if you look at the influence of Black Mirror, the British TV series, on people's thinking, it might be people are thinking much more cautiously about this, and they have almost an at-work persona and a real persona, and they are constantly editing themselves before they get their thoughts and their words captured online.
Yeah, that's a great reference. Like, I see the same way, the way we like naturally accept things like that would have been absolutely weird a decade or 2 decades ago.
Like what sort of things?
Like the one you mentioned around AI editing. Like the previous company I've been building was around cybersecurity of manipulated images and videos, just getting more and more accepted. So it's a great example. And what's like another thing where I wasn't sure, but I was wondering whether you had any experience that is keeping communities alive and using AI there. So basically, expert communities within an organization. Is that something that's a challenge today, even like, or this kind of lives on even if certain individuals leave the company? How can we utilize technology potentially to keep these communities thriving and enable the knowledge sharing there?
I think you mentioned psychological safety earlier, and I think that psychological safety is crucial in any community. You have to have a sense that it's okay to talk and share. Now, there's no technological solution to that, but there are technological safeguards that need to be in place to preserve it. So people need to feel in the community that they can talk. In successful communities, that's in place as a result of the personalities who lead the community. In the physical community at Learning Technologies, one of my jobs in the opening 10 minutes on stage before I introduce the keynote is to get people talking to each other and to try in that face-to-face environment to get people out of where they were into a space where they feel it's okay to share their ideas. That sort of thing has to happen and be maintained with an online community all the time. Now, if the key people who are leading it leave, then other people need to be ready to step up for it. And in particular, the right sort of behavior needs to be supported and the wrong sort of behavior suppressed. And you can't have people, if you have people bad-mouthing other people online or face-to-face, it very rapidly has a negative effect on the whole community. And somebody has to monitor that. You can do that physically, or you can do it with real people. You could do it with AI. And I think there's a lot to be said for using artificial intelligence systems for helping monitoring communities online to keep them not some sort of apple pie dreamland where everything is rosy, but to keep the conversation civil and to alert the monitors, to alert the people who are looking after the community to step in and take action. And I think if you don't do that, there's every risk that the communities will go wrong. So that's, I think, a very practical and, again, psychological aspect of running a community, which we probably don't pay enough attention to. But groups of people are largely self-monitoring, but they're not entirely self-monitoring. They always need somebody, I think, just to help keep, as I say, keep the conversation civil. Once you've got that in place, then you can have on top of it the AI solutions for putting experts together with the people who've really got a problem they need to have solved.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. Like, I loved how you connect the face-to-face elements as well. That definitely helps against the psychological barriers we've been discussing. If we turn back a little to the resurfacing of knowledge and also retrieving enterprise-wide knowledge using AI, in terms of implementation, like what are typical like mistakes you saw, like or like issues that teams who've been trying to solve this encountered?
I think one of the issues is going after the stuff that's easy, by which I mean There's an old story of Nasreddin Hoxha. It's a story in Turkey, this story's been retold many times in many different cultures. So Nasreddin Hoxha is found one evening. He's underneath a street lamp and he's patting the floor and he's looking around very carefully. And a guy walks past and says, "Nasreddin Hoxha, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I've lost my keys, so I'm looking for them. It's night. I want to get back into my house." And the guy says, "So what? You lost your keys here somewhere?" He said, "No. I lost my keys down the road, but there's no light there. So I'm looking here where there's light." And this tends to be the problem. We tend to look where the light is rather than where the problem is. So we tend to try to make the most sense of what we already have rather than going looking for the stuff that's highly valuable, but it's more difficult to find. So I think that we should be trying to capture as much around conversation and transcribe and interpret and codify that as we can. And we tend not to do that because it's a bit difficult. Whereas there's an awful lot of information in PDFs, reports, emails, documentation, which is valuable, but may not be as valuable as the conversational stuff. And I would suggest that rather than trying to transcribe people's casual conversations, the way to get around this is to have something like focus groups where you have groups of experts discuss a topic that is particularly important to the organization, how they've solved it, and so on. An hour-long conversation with only a handful of questions, 3 or 4 questions to prompt the conversation along, a skilled facilitator and a skilled note taker, and also the transcribing stuff that does stuff automatically, so that it's possible to really capture the expertise of those people and codify it in a way which then becomes accessible to everybody else. It's quite rare that people do this, but when they do it, it becomes a very valuable source of information. It's not timeless, though. Usually these things change over time, so you have to have a program whereby you get these people together again, let's say every 6 months, in order to just reassess how things are going. That sort of method for explicitly looking at what people know and then surface, so you're being quite clear about it. We're not eavesdropping on your conversation. We're getting you together and we value your expertise. We're going to surface it together. And then that implicit information becomes explicit and then becomes codified. I think that's the stuff that increasingly I see organizations doing.
Yeah, that's very clear. So basically, one thing that comes to my mind is the worry that business leaders are primarily after results as soon as possible to showcase value and ROI. And now we mentioned that we really want to go as deep and go for the uncharted territories that are the most challenging. How can you get the organizational buy-in for such a thing?
That's a great question. I think you have to present people with a very dramatic scenario. So coming back to the rail industry, right? In the rail industry, you have a bunch of people who have got a great deal of knowledge and who are about to leave. In the next 5 years, they've got retirement rates of 30 to 40% in some particularly skilled groups where they haven't got enough people to replace it. And I think if you don't, in that case, you don't have to go and convince anybody because they all know it's a problem and they're working on trying to solve it. But in the finance industry, for example, you will have something similar where you've got very highly skilled people. They've made plenty of money. They want to retire and they want to the organization should be looking at how do we get their knowledge out of their heads and into the next generation. And I think if you want to get the buy-in, you can't present it as something that's an academic exercise. It has to be an urgent requirement to get this done, because if you don't do it, you're going to, and this is the key phrase, you're going to fall behind your competitors. And as soon as you say that, then you're going to get into the excitement of the people you're talking to. Right? We're losing all these people. They're taking our secret sauce with them. We're going to fall behind our competitors. I need some budget to get this fixed. Then you're at least starting the conversation.
I love that. They are taking the knowledge with them. Exactly.
Yeah, and they are. But that's not how it's seen, because most people in organizations don't think about it that way.
Yeah, it's very insightful. How is the IT/security side of things from a data perspective? Like, do you see much barriers on that front implementing such technologies?
I have to say, you probably know more about this than I do, Dominik. So I'm going to pose the question to you. What about the security side of this, Dominik? Because it's a huge issue and people are very scared of, well, I think they're rightly scared or at least cautious about it.
Yeah, they are. They are like still is still, a field that's being uncovered more and more. Like I have continuous conversations with CIOs,
Yeah.
IT officials, and they are still banning entire AI systems in several companies. Like it varies across industries, so your insights are
That's
definitely valid.
interesting.
So I would say that for various reasons, the healthcare and the pharma space is extremely innovative, really deploying such AI technologies much faster than some of the other industries, like, for example, manufacturing.
That's it. I would have expected it to be the other way around. I would have thought healthcare would be much more cautious.
I would have expected as well, but they simply, at least the companies that we work with or partner with, have really accelerated the AI adoption. While some of the other industries, such as manufacturing, I see a much slower adoption and a lot more barriers. So there are definitely differences between industries, between countries as well, for sure, and regions.
Who are the enthusiasts and who are the people who are more cautious?
Enthusiasts is usually primarily the US, where innovation is what keeps you ahead of the competition. But in specific EU countries, like the data protection rights and all the EU policies which are being introduced and you have to comply with, they are taking it much slower.
Although interestingly, I had a chat with somebody last week at Learning Technologies who was talking about the implementation of coaching with AI, and this is something that's going to be absolutely huge. And to my surprise, she was talking to two large German companies who are going to be implementing coaching with AI at quite a lot of scale. You might not expect that because of the workers' councils in Germany.
Yeah.
But she was saying it's a straightforward cost measure. They know they can get more value from much less budget if they do this. So they're going to make it happen.
Coaching is really important, not just for training people and helping them increase their skills, but also possibly for this knowledge transfer. So you mentioned some telecommunications companies before. I talked to one of them in the past, and they really wanted to implement this AI coach that acts as someone's kind of like an avatar or kind of like a representative while they are out of office. So imagine that you go for a lovely holiday in Spain, and there is this virtual coach that kind of shares the knowledge that you took onto your holiday, so they don't need to disturb you on your holiday. And they wanted to implement this for 10,000 of their employees. They were so crazy about it. And I think that's also a very interesting example of how knowledge transfer and sharing this enterprise-wide knowledge can be utilized via coaching or via real-time assistance in that way.
You raised something really important here. Two things, right? Firstly, if I can have a digital doppelganger, a digital Don, why do we need Don at all? So if you get all of my knowledge, put it into a digital Don, and who can answer the questions that people have from me, well, I can be on holiday in Spain all the time. But then the second question is, well, there's two more questions. The second question is, what value do I add? Well, there are some things that only Don can solve and digital Don can't solve. But then beyond that, there's another question, which is who owns the data? So is digital Don something that I own as Donald Taylor, or does my employer own it because they put all the work into creating and codifying the data? But it's my knowledge, so who owns what I know? I haven't got an answer for this, but it's something which I think anybody who works in the knowledge industries will be extremely focused on, because that's where the secret sauce lies.
You know what's the third question there, which is who has access to specific layers of the information that digital Don has, right? Because you're not going to share the same level of transparency to a given individual as with your manager, right? It's different levels of information sharing. So so that's a very complex problem technologically.
It's a complex problem technologically. It's also a complex problem possibly psychologically and also business-wise. And these are all issues which I think, as we think about how we codify knowledge, are going to become urgently important, because this is something that's accelerating in terms of its impact and the possibilities it offers. we can't get away with ignoring it. And as soon as, again, coming back to urgency, as soon as some organizations start to say, we can do this and it gives us an edge, suppose you can make your key employees available 24/7 rather than 8 hours out of 24, 5 days a week, that gives you potentially a huge performance boost. So if you can do that, you're going to do it, and some companies will do it and really push the legal limits of what they can do. That means that everybody else is going to struggle to catch up, and they'll be forced to try to play the game.
In my way, turning back to the first question you asked, you would rather act as more like an FAQ bot, right? Like, I don't think AI is at a stage where we can really replicate the way you think, the way you act, but it's more like storing the information and getting access and retrieving that information.
So then we ask ourselves, how much of my work as a regular employee day to day is just being an FAQ bot? Suppose that that's what I do most of the time. Then we ask ourselves, well, what are the best ways of managing somebody so you can get much more out of them and their creative and other potential is truly exploited, and they're not simply being somebody who's answering the same question for the 20th time that week?
That's a great question, and also refers to a conversation I had in the last few weeks, which is how we can show the path to our workforce regarding how they can like learn different skills, like apply that in the era of AI, how they can more like orchestrate these experiences rather than stick to regular practices that turn them into FAQ machines, right? Which is not the intention.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to think about that we are on the edge of something where this is going to be, I think, a real factor for knowledge industry employees. And the organizations that flourish will be those that do two things. Firstly, enable their employees to get the most out of themselves beyond simply being FAQ bots, but also have the technological, legal, and psychological frameworks in place for that to happen securely and answer that crucial question, who does the knowledge belong to?
But from my perspective, like one thing I see continuous challenges with is this authorization of two different layers of information.
Yeah.
That's true for these coaching experiences. That's true for enterprise knowledge retrieval. So who has access to which type of information? And coming from a technology background, like that's an incredibly hard problem to solve. How do you map that? How do you put in the rules? Like it's just so complex, right?
Well, the crude way of doing it is to say that if you think about the secret services, right, you have access to different levels of secret information, and only the very people at the top, a handful of people have top secret information. You do something similar. So you say, that according to your level in the organization or outside the organization, you have access to certain levels of information. The problem then is, well, how do you know what level of information? So you can sort out the access, but the problem is codifying the information so that it's against one of those levels of access. And you might, by mistake, say, oh yeah, no, that's something anybody could know, but it could be incredibly valuable to somebody outside the organization, and it could slip out very easily.
Exactly. Is this a problem you encountered as well?
No, I'm just excited to think about it.
I
hadn't thought about it before this conversation.
I think the points here are that AI doesn't just store information. It reveals patterns of who, where, and what are critical. And for that, we can utilize all these technologies.
It's a really good point. What we're talking here about is not just the data itself, but the metadata around it, which enables us to understand what's important and what's not important, and to reveal patterns that we might otherwise have completely missed.
And how are you seeing the adoption of these? How are you seeing these challenges resolved in terms of timelines into the future? Like, do you see a really fast adoption cycle around this challenge, around the solutions, or this is going to take a while for the industry to really counter it?
I think this is all still so very new that I don't see anything changing the way most people do their work in the short term in established organizations. But in what are called AI native organizations, typically startups, anything that's been going for 2 or 3 years, there's the opportunity to take this approach and put it to work in a way that gives you an edge. And so you'll see the classic innovator's dilemma, where established legacy organizations keep doing things more or less in the way they've always done it, so that they can protect the revenues they've got. But innovator companies come in with entirely new ways of operating, based around some of the stuff we've been talking about, able to move in a much more agile way. And what I have seen is a couple of examples around this in the management consulting space. So you've got huge management consultancy companies that make very good revenues and great profits on the basis of having superb knowledge, which they can access and share very, very easily. But you've got challenger startups who are using the sort of information sharing, pooling, analyzing techniques that we've been talking about to just do the same thing but faster and cheaper. Faced with that dilemma, the established consultancies will almost certainly retreat up the value chain. So they will sacrifice the cheaper work they used to do and allow the innovator companies to take that and so on. It's a classic case of how change happens in organizations. Now, how long will it take to happen? I don't know, but I would imagine the next 2 years we'll see management consultancy challengers coming in who are doing the same work that your big four consultancies do, but at a much lower price. And I think that will be the vanguard, that will be the beginning of real change, where real knowledge management is seen to be something that has gone from being a sort of arcane, strange subject in the 1990s to being central to the success of modern organizations. So I'm saying 2 years, Dominik, to give you a short answer to your question.
I think that's a really pleasant timeline. Honestly, like if we can solve this challenge, that would be huge. One thing that I also realized was an advice I've received recently, which is normally if you start with revenue generation teams and primarily helping them to utilize this knowledge, that has just even faster impact on business results and actual revenue. Other than the engineers I mentioned, that could be even like a good tactical point.
Absolutely, and I saw a very simple example of this more than 10 years ago with Stanley Tools, I think it was, in North America. Very simply, just using short videos for the sales team to share what they were doing in selling tools from one part of the country to another. It was distributed across the northern US, and they had to bring people together to share their ideas, and they stopped doing that, and they just had people make and share short videos. So it is actually information sharing, but it had a tremendous effect on the sales team. What you have to have, though, coming back to the psychological point, is that the sales team has to be happy to share that information. And without that, nothing's going to happen. So the technology, I'm sure, can do it. We need to make sure the sales team feels happy to do it.
Absolutely. Like I think, in summary, as we discussed beforehand, your organization will be successful if you can focus on surfacing, sharing, and keeping the organization-specific information and utilize technology, specifically AI, accordingly. I think that kind of wraps up that part of the conversation. As mentioned to you in the beginning, I prepared some questions in addition to that. So of course you are Don Taylor, so we must talk about the L&D Global Sentiment Survey. You've been running this for over a decade. Has there ever been a result that genuinely shocked you in the recent past?
Actually, yes, this year. This year, I told everybody AI has leapt last year. So in 2024, it leapt to unprecedented heights in popularity. I said it's definitely going down. In 2025, I was wrong. It went up even further, 1.5% more than last year. I've stopped making predictions as a result, but that genuinely shocked me completely.
It's very interesting. Yeah. I think you mentioned that as well, like when we spoke about that a year ago, so 2 years ago, possibly. Yeah. You've spoken at events all over the world. Which country or region do you think is leading the most innovative thinking right now, utilizing AI?
That's a really tough one, because actually there's interesting stuff happening in the Middle East, of course in the States. But as I said earlier, I think the Scandinavia and the Nordic countries are overlooked often as a source of innovation in this. And I think there are many reasons for it, but I think I'd say my dark horse, because everyone would back the US, my dark horse with AI is Sweden. I'd say that's an interesting place to look.
I studied in Copenhagen, and already back in like a decade ago, eventually, like they've been gathering so much data. They literally been preparing for this. They've done it in such a clever way. Like AI courses, specifically like deep learning kind of courses, were not really existing anywhere else besides some of the Nordic universities, and I think they've done a fantastic job.
Why is that? What's behind it? Because I agree, but I can't work out what the common factor is.
I believe it's sort of having to innovate and focus on like the technology industry as a whole. Like they've been pioneers for the last few decades, and they acknowledge that AI is the next thing, and they saw the trends rising and really got the government backing these initiatives, like from the public transport to other parts. Like already in 2017, like the Copenhagen subway system was designed using several like machine learning algorithms. Like that was fantastic to see eventually.
I'm doing a trip to Copenhagen at some point later on this year. I'll come to you for some tips.
Yes, absolutely. You should do that. What's the next question is, what's something L&D people worry about way too much and something that they don't worry about nearly enough?
People worry about how things look too much. All the research shows people will use a resource if it helps them do their job better. People don't think enough about what's happening outside their organization. We need to be looking to the wider world to see the big picture, because that gives us the context to make great arguments inside the organization. Otherwise, we just are the people who make nice stuff.
I see what you mean there. And as someone who's deeply connected within the field and these areas of technologies, how do you stay sharp? How do you stay up to date? What are your methods?
I have a secret method, which is having conversation with interesting, intelligent people like you, Dominik. And if I have enough of those, that keeps me ahead.
Well, I hope that everyone can facilitate the right conversations, and this brings us back to the topic of organizational knowledge sharing. So I think connecting and networking within each company is also
I absolutely think that if L&D professionals are listening to this, they want to do one thing today to improve their understanding of the world and the business and their personal prospects, they should go and have a cup of coffee or tea with somebody else in the organization outside L&D. Go and do that and just sit down, let the conversation go, see where it goes to, and you'll be amazed what you learn.
Yeah, I see that point. Next one is one of my favorites, but who is someone in the learning space who you think kind of a role possibly that doesn't get enough credit for their work today?
I'm going to say Michelle Ockers. By the way, none of these questions I've seen beforehand, so this is all off the top of my head. I'm going to say Michelle Ockers, based in Australia, who does a brilliant podcast. It's called the L&D Unplugged, I think it is, or Uncut, L&D Uncut, where she interviews real people doing real things and surfaces great real case studies about what's happening. I mean, as well as being a fantastically committed, high-quality individual, that podcast alone is worth listening to, because it shows the reality of what's happening rather than what we too often have, which is the abstracted view of the world. That's the reality, and I think everyone should listen to it.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And maybe a final question. You work a lot with startups and founders. What's the one piece of advice you find yourself repeating to EdTech companies most often?
There's one piece. I'm going to answer this in two ways. There's one piece of information which every startup, regardless of its EdTech or anything else, always needs to know, which is keep your eye on the cash. Now, it sounds so trivial, but the reason why most organizations go bust is because they run out of cash. So I do find myself repeating that. But the other piece of information is that, and this is something actually you've done very well at Colossian, is to focus on the customer. If you focus on the customer, you understand what their needs are, and you see everything through their lens, then you understand the problems you're trying to solve. And far too often, people come to the marketplace with a solution that they're in love with, but they haven't sold the idea to people. Rather, go and find the problems that your customers are solving and help them on that way, and then everything else will look after itself.
Yeah, I can acknowledge that in the first few years as an engineer, like I was just so fond of building and was focused on the technology itself, but barely talked to any prospective customers. And I can definitely acknowledge that, and I learned by doing our own mistakes.
But that's not to say that a passion for the product isn't important. I know at Colossian,
Yes.
you're really product focused, but it's never enough. It's necessary but not sufficient, and the determining factor will always be the problems that you're solving for the customer.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much, Don. It's been a really amazing conversation. As I said, it's really one of the most fascinating topics and challenges that's out there today. And I was so glad to basically share your learnings here with the audience.
Look, thanks, Dominik. It's always good to chat, whether it's in front of a microphone, in front of the public, or just over a cup of coffee. It's always good to chat. Look forward to the next one very soon.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for everyone who's been watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify or give us a like on LinkedIn. And much appreciate your interest today. See you on the next episode. Thank you so much.